You've now learned all the pieces. You've learned how a game of chess can end. There's 3 special rules you have to learn, and then you'll be a full-fledged chess player. One is called castling. That's a special move where you get to move 2 pieces at the same time. Usually the battle at the beginning of the game is in the center, so you don't want your king, which is kind of like your general, to be in the middle of the battle. So, castling is between a king and a rook. It's when nothing is in between your king and your rook. Your king travels 2 squares, which normally is not allowed, stops, and then the rook jumps over the king. Rooks clearly don't usually jump over things, but it's all one special move, and the goal of castling is to get your king behind a wall of pawns, which white has just done. Now black can also castle with his rook by moving the king 1, 2, and the rook jumps over. Kings always move 2 squares. I know the black king's a little further from the corner than the white king, but that's just the nature of castling on the other side of the chessboard. Now, if we put the black king and rook back, we put the white king and rook back, there's a couple times in chess where you're not allowed to castle. If you've ever moved your king in a chess game, you can't castle for the rest of the game, even if you go back to the starting square. If you move your rook, you can't castle with that rook, but you could castle with the other rook if you still had it available. You also can't castle if it has anything to do with check. So if it's black's turn and black moves the bishop to b4 and puts the white king in check, you're not allowed to castle. If we magically sprinkle some fairy dust and make this bishop a light squared bishop, white also cannot castle here because his king is traveling through a square that's under attack. That's called castling through check. That's not allowed. Luckily, on Chess Kid, the computer won't even let you do it. And lastly, you can't castle if your king lands in check, but that's always the case. You can never put your own king in check. So if we move this f-pawn forward and we sprinkle some more fairy dust and make this bishop back to a dark squared bishop, here, white can't castle because if he moves his king 2 squares, he would already be in check by the bishop. So if you're thinking of castling and it has anything to do with check, you're not going to be allowed to. Let's learn a couple of special pawn moves. As you know, pawns are the only piece in chess that do not go backward. So, if white's pawn on h2 moves 2 squares, and then later on moves again, and again, and again, we're not being very fair to black by not giving him any moves, but eventually the white pawn will get to the other side of the chessboard, and you can see what your 4 options are. Instead of just sitting there like a rock, who wants to play with a rock, we allow the pawn to turn into something bigger. We call this promotion. It doesn't matter if you are talking about a job or your grade in school. Promotions are always a good thing. And 99% of the time, you're going to want a queen. In fact, if you already have a queen, you're allowed to get a second queen, a third queen, a fourth queen. Some people don't know that, but I'm here to tell you that's the rule. So you always want a queen pretty much. We often call this queening a pawn because getting a queen is so common. And so that pawn turns into a queen. The queen is immediately checking the king. And if the king moves, by the way, you could actually keep going and capture the rook. That would be a great tactic, as we say in chess. One more special move to learn. In this position, the black pawn on g7 could go 2 squares to g5 and pass right by the white pawn. Now, this was actually a rule change in chess about 400 years ago. I don't know if you were around for it, I'm guessing not. Pawns used to be able to only move 1 square even on their first move, which means they would always give the enemy pawn 1 chance to capture. But because of this new rule that you know, pawns can move 2 squares on their first turn, we have a very special situation. If your pawn moves 2 squares and ends up directly beside an enemy pawn, and the enemy pawn could have captured if you had moved 1 square, then there's a special rule called en passant, which is French for in passing. The white pawn can go diagonal to a blank square and lift the black pawn off the board to make a capture. It looks incredibly strange. Most people that have not been trained don't even know this rule, but it is a rule of chess. It's only with pawns, and it's only on the very next turn. If you want to capture en passant, you have to do it right away. Let's go back and look at it one more time. Black's pawn moves 2 squares, and he's not directly in front of a white pawn. He's directly beside a white pawn. If I was the white player, I would ask myself, could I have captured this pawn if it had moved 1 square? Of course, the answer is yes. So capturing en passant is also yes. If it had moved 1 square, you could have captured. And because it moved 2 squares, You can still capture, and it's actually the exact same final position. Very strange rule, but it is a rule of chess. Now you know how all the pieces move. Check, checkmate, stalemate, castling, promotion, en passant. See, you're a chess player, you didn't even know it. However, in order to close out our video, maybe let's spend 30 seconds talking about where the pieces start and how to open a chess game. If you don't survive the opening, none of the other things are going to matter. This is where all the pieces begin. Notice the white queen starts on a white square, the black queen on a dark square. If you get that right, pretty much everything else falls into place. And these are my 3 main tips for starting a chess game. Number 1, you want to aim at the center of the chessboard. These are our 4 center squares. So the most common opening moves are e4 and d4, one of those 2 center pawns. And let's go ahead and keep on being unfair to black and give white more moves. If white could get both pawns in the center, that would be fantastic. Next rule of the opening is to get your knights and bishops off the back row. And where should they come? Toward the center. Notice those knights are aiming at center squares. Let's have white move the bishops out, aiming at the center. And then the final rule, besides controlling the center and getting your knights and bishops out, we call that developing, is to castle. Get your king safe. Usually that means castling. Here, the king can move 2, the rook can jump over, and the king is behind a wall of pawns. If you can think of those 3 things in your first 10 moves, you will have a great start to your chess game and to your chess career.